listeners. Welcome to Itihasa, a Indic history podcast, and you're listening to episode 44 of this season, Vijayanagara. The last few months have been extremely harsh and brutal for India and Indians all over the world. This deadly virus that had surged in India in the last few months had tested the healthcare system and our nerves to the limits. My whole family back home in India, back in April and May, had tested positive with COVID. And my own sister went through considerable pain and trauma, battling her serious lung infection in the ICU. By God's grace and the efforts of the hard-working doctors, her life was saved from the edge. And the rest of my family too recovered fortunately. There are thousands out there whose family members or a loved one might have succumbed to this pandemic, in spite of the best of treatments. I offer my heartfelt condolences to each and everyone who has lost someone close and dear. I've personally heard of so many of my acquaintances, family and friends going through a lot on the personal front. Or even more tragic, hundreds and thousands of those who couldn't afford a treatment, get a bed in the hospital, or even an oxygen cylinder to just keep breathing. The least each of us could do is to offer not just our moral support, but also financial support, or help our neighbors, friends, and family in kind. I humbly request all my listeners out there to be extremely cautious, not venture out without mask, even assuming you're fully vaccinated. At least till the dust settles. Each one of us has to do our part to turn back this tide and restore a semblance of peace. If you haven't yet gotten vaccinated, please do at the earliest. Now that's out of the way, let us pick up the story from where we left in the last episode. In the last episode, we looked at the multiple conflicts between the arch rivals of Vijayanagara and Bahamani Sultanate during the reign of Devaraya I. We witnessed the dramatic showdown between Firoz Shah Bahamani and Devaraya I, ending in the humiliation of the former. Devaraya I finally has his revenge after being humiliated in the hands of his rival earlier. We had ended the previous episode with the mental breakdown and eventual death of Firoz Shah after his crushing defeat in his last conflict with Devaraya I. His son, Sultan Ahmad Shah Bahamani, had succeeded the dead Sultan. In revenge for the havoc done by Devaraya I, Ahmad Shah declared a new war on Vijayanagara and marched southwards with his army. Devaraya I had no other alternative but to accept this challenge. As usual with the Rayas of Vijayanagara, he revived the alliance with the king of Warangal and moved with his own troops to the banks of the Tungabhadra. Here he was encamped waiting for the enemy. Soon after, Ahmad Shah also arrived on the north bank of the river, where he camped opposite the Hindu army. Devaraya's instructions to his army were to prevent the Muslim troops from crossing the river. But in spite of precautions, after 40 days, the Sultan's troops crossed it at a distance and by a fortunate accident made Devaraya a prisoner. How this exactly happened is unknown. When this news got out, the Vijayanagara force lost heart and began a hasty retreat. Devaraya I, however, soon escaped and rejoined his forces. And the scattered forces rallied and order was once again restored. Unfortunately though, Devaraya's Warangal allies had already deserted him, thinking he was captured. And Devaraya too considered his initial capture unlucky and of some bad omen. So Devaraya laid aside his original plan of engaging the Bahamani forces in the field and retreated to Vijayanagara. With the Vijayanagara forces retreating from the field, Ahmad Shah took this as weakness and overran the open country. And as part of this pillage of the Vijayanagara countryside, The Bahamani forces destroyed many temples and burned down many villages. Ahmad Shah laid aside all humanity, and wherever he went, he massacred men, women, and children without mercy, contrary to the treaty previously made by the previous Sultan. Whenever the number of the slain amounted to 20,000, he halted for 3 days and made a festival in celebration of the bloodletting and savagery. Exasperated with these insults of their gods, temples, and the incessant atrocities against the people, a body of 5,000 Vijayanagara soldiers took an oath to assassinate him at the first favorable opportunity. They lay in wait to ambush the Sultan and his bodyguards. Once the Sultan, having gone on a hunt 12 miles from his camp, somehow got himself separated from his companions. The lurking band of Hindu soldiers took advantage of this chance and pounced upon him. Ahmad Shah and his followers retired to a mud enclosure close by and defended themselves as best they could for some time. When the pressing Hindus were about to overpower them, the Sultan's armor-bearer, Abdul Qadir, came to his master's rescue with a body of troops. Soon a general struggle ensued between both the camps, in which, according to Farishta, the Hindu soldiers were pushed back with a loss of 100 men, and the Bahamani losses being about 500 men. After this event, the Sultan marched on Vijayanagara and laid siege to it. As a result, the citizens of the capital were reduced to great distress, and Devaraya sued for peace. The Sultan agreed to this on condition that Devaraya consented to pay the tribute of all the unpaid years and have this tribute carried on his best elephants and escorted by his own son with all pomp and honor to the Bahamani camp outside the capital. Devaraya agreed to this demand and sent his son with 30 elephants laden with the treasure. The Sultan raised the siege and left Vijayanagara, accompanied by Devaraya's son. After his arrival on the banks of Krishna river, he sent the Raya's son back and himself proceeding to the Bahamani capital of Gulbarga. With this, yet another war between the Vijayanagara and Bahamanis had ended. But it was followed by a brutal drought throughout the Deccan and Karnataka that distressed the populations of both the kingdoms up until 1424 CE for 2 long years. In spite of these setbacks, Vijayanagara soon recovered its strength, making Devaraya I's reign memorable in the empire. The long years of peace that followed this war stirred the literary and religious talents of the people of the empire, as nothing else had done for half a century before. The sanctity of Holy Hampi, the attractions of the imperial city, and more than all, the extraordinary interest of the king in literary and religious matters attracted a multitude of gifted men from far and near. After the death of Devaraya I, Devaraya II's relations with the Bahamani kingdom, however, continued to be hostile. Soon after his accession in 1436 CE, Sultan Alauddin II sent his brother Muhammad against Vijayanagara to recover the arrears of the tribute, and Devaraya II had to pay a large amount. The Vijayanagara armies up until that point did not have consistent successes in their contests with Bahamani forces. To remedy this, Devaraya II held a council of his nobility to explore the causes of Bahamani successes and devise means of counteracting them. And he soon discovered that the failure of his soldiers was mainly due to the inferior horses and deficiency in the skill of horseback archery. To remedy this, Devaraya II put in place new reforms and made Muslim mercenaries and soldiers eligible for service in the Vijayanagara army. Devaraya also allowed the free exercise of their religion while in service, and even constructed a mosque in the capital for their use. It is said that a Quran was placed before his throne, that they might perform the ceremony of obeisance in his presence without sinning against their laws. The Hindu soldiers in the Vijayanagara army learnt new archery and cavalry techniques, and this was followed up with a complete reorganization of the army. After this reorganization, the Vijayanagara army became a much more efficient and lethal striking force. There were approximately around 2,000 Muslim soldiers, 60,000 Hindu soldiers trained and skilled in archery, 80,000 cavalry, and 200,000 infantry armed with pikes, swords, and lances. Sometime after the above events, an incident of considerable magnitude happened in 1443 CE at Vijayanagara, and this was recorded by the Central Asian traveller Abdur Razak in his accounts. It is recorded that a brother of the Emperor Devaraya II, who was desperate to gain the throne, hatched a conspiracy to assassinate the Devaraya and attempt a coup. Under the pretext of feeding the royal guests on the occasion of building a new palace, the scheming brother invited important officers of the state from the emperor's faction. On their arrival, one by one was dispatched by specially appointed assassins. Luckily though, the emperor had earlier excused himself from this feast, claiming he wasn't feeling well. After the assassination of the emperor's officers at his palace, the brother rushes to the emperor's royal palace, catches him off guard, and strikes him multiple blows with his dagger. When the emperor falls down bleeding with these blows, his brother thinks that the emperor is dead, and in his excitement rushes to the palace portico and proclaims himself the new emperor in front of the nobility that were assembled there. Luckily, Devaraya II wasn't dead and only seriously injured. When the bleeding emperor arrives in the portico, his brother is apprehended and is put to death on the spot. After this, Devaraya exacts his revenge against everyone who was part of this conspiracy, tortures and puts to death all of them and their family members to send a strong message. When the news of the supposed assassination attempt of Devaraya initially reached the Bahamani capital of Gulbarga, there was naturally a great celebration among them. Sultan Alauddin, who was then the Bahamani ruler, decided that it was a favorable time to attack and crush Vijayanagara for once and all. An excuse was soon found. A message was sent to Devaraya II, demanding the usual payment of 7 lakh varahas. The Vijayanagara emperor was visibly irritated with this and asked his Bahamani rival to prepare for a war instead. And with this, it was the start of the 10th Vijayanagara Bahamani War in 1443 CE. Devaraya's plan was to take the offensive himself and try if possible to recover the fertile Raichur Doab which had been lost in a previous war. So he sent his 2 sons to capture Raichur and Bankapur, while he himself crossed the Tungabhadra river and suddenly took the fortress of Mudgal. After which he marched to the banks of Krishna river where he encamped. From there he sent out detachments to plunder the enemy country as far as Sagar and Bijapur. Hearing this, the Sultan Alauddin marched with an army of 50,000 horses and 60,000 infantry and a considerable train of artillery. On his approach, Devaraya changed his tactics by shifting his ground and returning to Mudgal, under whose walls he again encamped. Then he detached a large portion of his army to harass the Sultan, who had halted at a distance of 12 miles from the fort. From this place, he sent his officers to engage Raya and his 2 sons, who were besieging Raichur and Bankapur. In one of these minor battles, Devaraya's eldest son was wounded and driven out from Raichur. Soon his other son also had to raise the siege of Bankapur and retire. The 2 main armies next met at Mudgal. Between them, 3 big battles were fought in the course of 2 months. As usual, in the first fight, the Vijayanagara army was greatly successful, and the Bahamani suffered a great deal. But in the others, the Sultan was victorious. In the last fight, the eldest son of Devaraya was killed, and the Vijayanagara army retreated into the fortress of Mudgar. Devaraya saw that there was a stalemate and had no option but to sue for peace. Both the rivals in the end agreed to each other's conditions and declared a ceasefire that lasted until his death. Devaraya II's reign marks the golden age of the first dynasty. He was the last great personality among the kings of Sangama line that ruled Vijayanagara. After his death, his younger brother Vijayadevaraya ruled for a short time. But Devaraya II's son Mallikarjuna, who was then governing the now Shimoga district, was the last to forego his claims to the throne, which had been his by right since the death of his father. Very soon Mallikarjuna secured the upper hand and drove his rivals out of the country. Interestingly, the Bahamani Sultan, after learning that Devaraya II's eventual successor Mallikarjuna was young and inexperienced, started preparing for a war in order to wipe off the disgrace of former defeats. With this end in view, he sought the alliance of the powerful Gajapati ruler of Orissa. The Gajapatis, who had an intense rivalry with the Vijayanagara, were eager to form this alliance and lay their hands on the Vijayanagara territories. And with this, we shall end this episode and the third part of the Vijayanagara Gajapati War mini-series. I sincerely hope the listeners enjoyed this episode. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and leave a rating and a review wherever it is that you're listening. A huge thank you for taking the time to listen to the show. I hope to see you soon in the next episode. Till then, this is Narendra Vikram, your host and narrator signing off. Hope you have a great week ahead.